Okay, well listen, thank you for asking me to come here to talk to you today. I always feel really at home when I come to the National Library of New Zealand. When Jenny asked me to speak and mentioned that the other keynote would be Pat and that he was focusing on the idea of collective impact of programs of work, that idea really resonated with me. Just last week I saw a quote on our internal Yammer site that said, "Old librarians love books, good librarians love data, great librarians love people." Now, the first part is ageist and derogatory, but the second two parts of the quote really spoke to me. And I like to think about combining those to say that great librarians love the way that data, even the kind of data that Pat was talking to us about too, and content can serve people and can have impacts beyond our imagining and should actually change lives. So we've been thinking a lot about impact recently at the National Library, especially in relation to Trove, but the concepts are just as relevant to national bibliographic services such as Libraries Australia and Te Puna. Before I go on, can you just put your hand up if you haven't heard about Trove, if you don't know what I'm talking about? Excellent, that makes my job easier later in the paper. Okay, I don't have any doubts about the collective impact of our decades worth of national collaborations, but I do think that we're now in a social, policy, technical and fiscal environment in which we need to ask ourselves how we can maximise our collective impact and change the most lives. So our predecessors in our profession, certainly in Australia, took really giant steps decades ago by instituting efficient and effective national bibliographic services. And one of the questions in my mind is, how can we know that we're still delivering those services most effectively and most efficiently at the national level? When, if ever, will come the day when it's more effective to work either at larger international scale or even at that micro scale, the kind of micro scale that Pat was talking about today? So as a member of the National Library's senior management team, I ponder these questions about a range of our programs, right through from bibliographic to digital preservation and digital access. But today, of course, I'll focus on Libraries Australia, and I hope that what I have to say will help you as you're rethinking the future of Te Puna. Now, as I mentioned, I really have got people, forebears before me who worked really hard in the areas that matter to our National Library and to our services. I know that some of you will be familiar with Libraries Australia and other national services, but I just want to stress that the National Library Act of 1960 includes specific provisions concerning the library's role in providing national services to assist Australian libraries and authorities. So our current set of strategic directions includes a direction which is to deliver national leadership, an aspiration which is to provide national infrastructure to underpin efficient and effective library services in the 21st century digital world, and a specific action which is to renew the Libraries Australia search service to meet the collection management needs of more than 1,200 Australian libraries. So this speaks really directly to Libraries Australia's mission, as do two other aspirations, which are to engage with libraries in the Asia and Pacific regions, I'm here today, and to participate in international collaborations with a focus on standards and practices for creating and exchanging data describing collections. But beyond this focus on data and libraries, our library's strategic directions also set our intentions to make our collections and services accessible to all Australians, to engage with diverse Australian audiences, including those in regional and remote communities, and to support research and lifelong learning for all Australians by maximising online access to our collections and services. So in the current triennium, around this cluster of aspirations, it's my job to develop a robust and sustainable business model for Trove. Not that easy. We're expanding digitisation of regional and community newspapers in partnership with those communities and benefactors, And we're aiming to find faster and cheaper ways of making our collections discoverable in the online environment. So the entire focus of this work is on maximising our collective impact. But I don't have to tell this audience that maximising our impact in relation to our collections depends on good metadata and on people who are passionate about it. So it starts with librarians working at individual libraries and expands its power through shared bibliographic services. So Libraries Australia and its predecessors, ABN and Kinetica, have been running successfully for more than 30 years. And those services are really thanks to the leadership of people decades ago. And on days when I'm trying to figure out our next move, I look at this little office installation of the name badges which some of my predecessors left behind in the office. So I had a really big job when I moved into my office. There was decades worth of papers that needed an archivist like me to arrange and describe them. But I also found these little name badges, and I find it really, really comforting to just think that I'm just one in a long line of people who've actually been doing this work. So it's the first time I photographed them, and if I was creative, I'd make some kind of artwork with them, I think. My colleague Debbie, I think, has spoken at Te Puna conferences before and may be known to some of you, and I should just report that she's now happily retired in a climate much warmer than Wellington or Canberra. Now, over the last several decades, these leaders have built a formidable piece of national infrastructure. Libraries Australia includes more than 25 million bibliographic records, 50 million holdings, has more than 1,200 member libraries, supported nearly 18 million searches last financial year, and more than 18 million bibliographic transactions, so adds, edits and deletes. So by any measure, it's really quite a big service. Support for Libraries Australia is provided by two divisions of the library, my own, resource sharing. We're responsible for strategic directions, business, data management and member support, and the Information Technology Division, which is responsible for our infrastructure and the many pieces of internally developed software which support our service. I just want to stress that the National Library of Australia has a relatively large IT division. We have more than 40 IT people. More than 10% of our total staff is in our IT division, so hold on to that as an important part of our context. The National Library also creates the majority of original records added to Libraries Australia, and they're created by our colleagues in the Collections Management Division. We're by far the biggest lender in the Australian ILL system, just by a country mile, and ILL and document delivery is managed by our colleagues in Australian Collections and Arena Services Division. And while we manage our own billing, our colleagues in corporate services provide our financial services and assist us with the cost modelling that we do. So this is really a way of saying that Libraries Australia and its content is a major area of business for most parts of the National Library of Australia, and we see it as an essential part of our national leadership role. Now, we offer a range of services, and the best way to talk about these is to show you this fairly scary looking diagram of the ways in which the various bits of Libraries Australia work. When I first moved up to the Resource Sharing Division, I actually had a copy of this laminated, and I know it's lame, but I've actually got it on my office wall at home, but it's worth looking at. Like most National Library of Australia services, the LA stack includes some pieces of licensed software, so they're the ones that I've put a little box around, and a lot of internally developed software customised over the years by that large IT division that we have. So to focus first on bibliographic services, our members can add records using our record import service, or RIS, the cataloguing client and the web cataloguing form. And while RIS accounts for the vast majority of record adds, edits and deletes, all three of these methods are still in sufficient use for us to retain the three options. And I know that they're similar to the options that you have via Te Puna. We can also export records through our record export service, or RES, and our products service, which includes self-help data products and a boutique service for particular customer needs. And of course, we support standard protocols. Now, additions, adds and deletes of records and holdings are all managed in OCLC's CBS software. That's the big thing in the middle of the diagram there, which is supported primarily by OCLC in Leiden. So that's a difference between Libraries Australia and Te Puna. We apply match-merge processes, and we're always refining our scripting to minimise the quantity of manual review that we need to do of all of these incoming records. And of course, we also offer our search service, which is based on an ageing TerraText database. We're redeveloping search right at the moment, and I'll return to this a little bit later. And we offer our members other targets, including Te Puna, via the search service. And then, of course, there's Libraries Australia document delivery. Unlike Te Puna, we still have a local version of VDX, and we upgraded to VDX 6 just the weekend before last. And certainly I've been talking to my colleagues here about the future of this service from our perspective. So I'd just like to share some long-term trends for use of Libraries Australia services, as it's really important to consider these as part of our decision-making context around Libraries Australia. So as you can see, the use of our search service has climbed steadily over more than 10 years. And we're now supporting twice as many searches as when we developed Libraries Australia back in 2005-06. The dotted column, of course, is this financial year to date, so we're still going to see further growth this year. And behind this search activity, there are more bibliographic records and holdings being added to Libraries Australia than ever before. Under the hood, we know that all methods of engaging with the Australian National Bibliographic Database, the NBD, are holding their use patterns, so we will continue with those. On the document delivery side, we've already passed the peak of activity, and we know that for a small number of Australia's biggest university libraries, Libraries Australia Document Delivery, or LAD for short, now supports just less than half of their document delivery activity on behalf of their members. So that's changing. There are plenty of competitors out there in the DocDel space, especially for article level service. So the peak occurred between 2008 and 2010, but as you can see, we're still running at levels above where we were 10 years ago. And if I were a betting woman, I would suggest that we'll just see a very gradual tailing off of this activity over the next several years, and I would be astonished if the traffic was ever to go up again. Still, LAD is still supporting at least 250,000 transactions a year, and in terms of impact, what that means, it just means 250,000 resources are getting into the hands of mostly Australians who otherwise wouldn't be able to get them. So despite dire predictions, ILL and document delivery are not dead. And here's a graph we haven't run before, showing Australian lending to New Zealand and New Zealand lending to Australia since Trans-Tasman lending commenced in 2006. Requests to New Zealand form a modest 1.1% of all LAD requests, and supplies to New Zealand form about 2.3% of all transactions. It's about what you'd expect, I think, that relativity. So between us, we did manage to get about 10,000 resources across the Tasman, and if we hadn't been able to do that, people, of course, would have had to cross the ditch. You can see we've also seen a peak in Trans-Tasman lending, and we're in gradual design, but I'm a bit of a why person, and it drives me mad that I have absolutely no idea why the peak in Trans-Tasman lending is about 2 years behind the rest of the LAD picture. If you've got a solution, let me know. Over the last 9 months, we've also been looking at other aspects of our service, and in particular, our product service, which supplies specialist data sets either on a self-help or a charge basis. Last July, we increased our product charges, but we also introduced a new booklet really aimed at promoting what you can do with these data products. We also spoke about what you can do with them at our Libraries Australia Forum. But as you can see, there's no real sign that our increased charges, our booklet or promotion of the service have actually made any difference in this space, either up or down. What we can see is that we've had, over a period of time, about a halving of use of this service. I think it's still really useful, and in fact a colleague at the State Library of Queensland told me just last week that their monthly product of new items published in Queensland significantly increases their legal deposit claiming success. So I think that although we can see numbers going down on this service, we know that it still has value, and we're trying to understand more what that value is so we can decide where we should put our effort in this area. Now, before we move on, I'd like to note that the graphs you've seen this morning are produced by our business manager from a really extensive storehouse of business metrics. We maintain a very close eye on these metrics, and we also make them freely available to our members. So, for example, we recently spent quite a lot of time and provided a set of detailed data sets and graphs relating to university sector engagement with Libraries Australia over a 10-year period. So we aim to be as transparent as possible with our members, even when we know, as is the case with the universities, that they were going to use that data to ask themselves hard questions about whether they're still getting value for money from the service. And believe me, they do ask that. And this is important because the university sector accounts for half of Libraries Australia activity and half of our revenue. So they're an important stakeholder for us. I completely understand the question being asked, and I often actually see a disconnect between the way that library CEOs think about Libraries Australia and its value proposition. That is, they ask questions about what value they're still getting from it, and the way that their staff who are using the service think about it, which is they see it as essential, you shouldn't ask any questions about it, they're absolutely sure that they still need to be there. So there can be a real disconnect between what CEOs are thinking and what staff are thinking. Much is changing in the library world, and that means that every CEO worth his or her salt will indeed be thinking about where they want to actually invest. Now, the two biggest changes will be obvious to you. A major shift to acquiring or leasing electronic rather than acquiring print, and increasing outsourcing of cataloguing activity, especially in the university and public library sectors. These changes are happening across most sectors, with the exception of special libraries in Australia, where their size and disparate nature makes it difficult for them to seize new opportunities or new ways of doing things. And right at the moment in Australia, they are just closing left, right and centre, especially government libraries, under huge pressure at the moment. In some Australian universities, 90% of acquisitions budgets are now being spent on electronic resources. And public libraries, of course, are moving fast into that e-book world. And one of the logical consequences of this is that libraries will need to do less copy cataloguing, and therefore one of the major efficiencies that Libraries Australia offers will reduce in value over the coming years. But on the other hand, we know that many libraries will be managing down their print collections over the next few years, and the holdings data that we have may actually help them to make decisions in that world. So the growth we're still seeing in use of our services may actually be a sign that libraries are kind of preparing to move out of that world. Another consequence of the move to electronic is that with more and more restrictive publisher licensing, the capacity for document delivery is reducing at the same time as electronic access would theoretically make it easier to supply to other libraries. We are aware of the potential of these big changes to undermine Libraries Australia's underlying value proposition. That is, that our cataloguing and document supply services offer Australian libraries efficiencies in their day-to-day business. We know from our surveys and interviews and reviews that more and more libraries are being asked to justify individual aspects of their expenditure to their parent bodies rather than managing a program budget. So government libraries particularly really feeling the pressure in Australia with declining budgets, actual or threatened closures, and an increasingly tough environment in which to make a call for relevance. So we absolutely expect that all parts of our membership will be looking more and more at the bottom line and asking whether they still need our services or whether they can secure similar services from somebody else at a lower cost. Another major disruption or change to the way that libraries are doing their business is the advent of cloud-based services. Clearly, these have the capacity to transform data flows. We've been living in a world in which ILMS vendors and metadata aggregators occupied fairly separate parts of the universe. They're out here. But we're now in transition to a world in which vendors of cloud-based ILMS systems are also potentially or actually metadata aggregators. So we can think about Ex Libris's Alma and their community catalogue. And simultaneously, where metadata aggregators such as OCLC are moving into offering cloud-based services, in this case, wheelchair management services. And I'll talk a little about our responses to those changes a bit later. We delved really deeply into these and other library mission and priority changes a couple of years ago when we decided whether to proceed with a significant investment to redevelop the Libraries Australia Search Service. As a senior manager, I needed to know that the new software asset we would develop through this project would earn its keep by being useful for at least 5 years and preferably 7. So it was a real cost-benefit ratio there. We undertook a large survey of our users in late 2011 and early 2012, combined that with intensive interviews with library leaders from every sector before confirming our confidence that our services are still in demand, still useful, and that providing the services ourselves at the National Library of Australia still seems to offer the most effective and efficient operation for our members. Now, it's all very well to say we did a lot of thinking before deciding to invest in redeveloping the search service, and we did. But we were also being pushed. When we embarked on the project, we were supporting twice as much activity in Libraries Australia as when we developed it, and it was under huge strain. We had a horror run of outages. We were having to spoon feed in batches of records, literally just pushing through 1,000 records at a time instead of pushing through 200,000 at a time to avoid overwhelming the system. And we were in real danger of not being able to provide the reliable service that our members really needed. Our big problem was that the software platform, the TerraText platform that we used, was no longer able to cope with the volume of activity we needed to support. We knew we needed to replace it with a more scalable platform, and our experience using Solar Lucene to support Trove showed us that it should scale up to meet our needs. So our aim was to get an infrastructure that looked like this. So the search service was really replacing the TerraText database with this Solar Lucene database. I've been in the library long enough to know that when we first started with TerraText, it was the best thing since sliced bread, and the gloss goes off really fast, and I'm sure the gloss will come off Solar Lucene really fast too. I think you'll understand from the number of connections shown here that we also needed to upgrade our hardware and many pieces of software in order to achieve this. That included replacing Oracle, right down the bottom there, with MySQL, and as part of our Libraries Australia Search Replacement or LASER project. In addition to beginning our replacement project, though, we did some interim risk mitigation, and I just want to talk about this because sometimes you can make your systems last that little bit longer by doing things that might have seemed unfeasible in the past. We actually created a whole second instance of the Libraries Australia database, and we moved all National Library cataloguing, interlibrary loan activity and our records export service on what we call the internal instance, and moved everybody else onto the external instance. This is not a small thing, trying to replicate your database and still having your services run from it. And it did take quite a bit of work, and there were associated tweaks around the edges, but it's really paid off because when we started this replacement project, we thought it would take us 12 months. And we were seriously worried about the risk that we could no longer provide services to our users inside that 12-month period. In fact, we were able to address those risks, and we've breathed quite easily for the last year, which is really, really good because our 12-month project has turned into a 2-year project. And with the additional costs that this has brought, so it's probably doubled the cost of the redevelopment, I'm even gladder that we did all that preparatory work, the kind of work that you're doing around Te Puna at the moment, to make sure the project was really worth proceeding with. So a big lesson for us here, one that my colleagues here might like to think about, is that even when your requirements are really well known and you're replacing a mature system, there can be many unexpected delays and underestimates along the way. So we wanted to improve our search service for our members, but we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. In deciding how to proceed, we had the benefit of huge buy-in from our members. More than 500 individuals from more than 360 of our member libraries gave freely of their time, thoughts and expertise, completing a detailed survey about their interactions with Libraries Australia. They provided more than 3,000 incredibly thoughtful and useful textual comments in that survey. And we also had the input of senior library leaders who gave up their valuable time to talk to us about strategic directions for Libraries Australia. What was the big picture? We gained a lot of information during that review period that directly fed into our decisions around Libraries Australia search. We got many suggestions about what our members liked about the existing service, what they didn't like, what they wanted to see changed. We found that they were actually really pretty happy with the existing service apart from the performance issues, and they didn't want things to change too much in the interface, so we listened to that. We heard loud and clear that they did not want a Trove-like interface. That was a powerful message. And we also heard loud and clear that they did not want to be working in a Ferberised environment. They wanted to be looking at individual manifestation level records, not at an FRBR view of bibliographic metadata. And we also found they developed ingenious workarounds for things that the old service didn't offer, and we've been able to address most of those in the new service. So there was a really, it was a very interesting period for us. And in terms of strategic directions for the library, this actually had a big impact because we had been asking ourselves whether we could try to run Libraries Australia and Trove from a single database. There were theoretically significant savings to be made from having the single database and running two separate services from it. But in practice, we decided this was way too risky, would have required very complex rules and would compromise performance. The number of indexes that our librarians using Libraries Australia need is many more than the public needs when they're interacting with Trove. And if you know anything about big databases, every extra index you have to support really degrades performance. So it was a nice idea, time isn't for us now. So where are we now with this redevelopment? We actually started the project early in 2012. We released our first alpha version in May, second alpha version in the 23rd of October. We had really hoped to deliver this service a bit earlier than now, but we're now confident it will be at the end of June. It has taken twice as long as anticipated, but we are nearly there. Our communication with our members wasn't just before we actually started this project. And in terms of redeveloping a service like this, I think our communication worked quite well. We sent a business analyst and a designer to observe our members actually using the service, and we had a really strict rule, no bosses were to be around. That was an important rule. And we learned so much from doing so. We maintained a project blog, and we developed these alpha versions, letting our members know about the functionality, what was available and what wasn't. So that was quite important. We also sought a lot of feedback along the way from our members. So as you can see, we told people what was the same, what was different, and gave them many different options for feedback. And again, when you're doing a big system development like this, you have to offer lots of options because different people have got different ways of communicating. Now I'm going to move quite fast through a few screens from our alpha version 2. If anybody really wants to see more screens for how Libraries Australia will be in the future, just send me at lunchtime because I've got a full set and can run you through them. And I should just note that the colour scheme of the alpha was deliberately muted, and we've actually opted to stick with our current livery and branding. So we encouraged our members to test the simple and advanced search and browse. Our simple search screen now shows highly used databases, you can see those down the bottom, and offers the ability to add and remove databases on the same page. So it really dramatically reduces the number of clicks that our members have to use. Just go back to one further. Okay, so that's browse. I'm just highlighting Te Puna there for you, among others. We've also made significant changes to the advanced search screen and a number of the indexes there. Just really simple things like we didn't have author in the advanced search, and it turned out it was really important for our users. We split the number indexes into two, one for control numbers and one for standard numbers. That's going to really advance efficiency for our members. And we've also given members an option to search for the date on which a record was created, not the date that it was added to Libraries Australia. Who knew? We didn't know that people actually wanted to know that until we went out and talked to them. Search limits are shown at the top of the results screen. I'm sorry, I'm using an Australian example here. I should have used Eleanor Catton's Luminaries, which I'm halfway through, but you should all know Tim Winton and Cloud Street. And we've got a few things I just wanted to show you here on our results screens. We've got previewing on hover for records. So you can see here, if you think it's the right record, you'll get this preview screen down the side. And we've also got preview on holdings. So you can see immediately who holds the library. And if you don't like this, you can just decide to hide the preview and it will know that. So if it's not for you, you can just get rid of it. Now, these previews were added to assist librarians to find the right record with a minimum of clicks. And additionally, some interlibrary loans officers asked said that it would be easier and faster to find what they wanted if the holding statements were a bit more visible. We've also changed the screen layout and sorting, and you can choose your own sort options and they'll be hung onto in your own PC. Our members will have new sort options, including relevance ranking. We used to have this in Libraries Australia and we had to turn it off because it was degrading performance as the number of transactions went up. So we're going to have it back in again. And the number of holdings, which is a fairly important kind of measure of how important the book, how popular it is. I just wanted to highlight two specific interface improvements. The first of which is favourite libraries. Now, this is one of my favourite stories. When our business analyst, now I'll just stress this, business analyst and web designer went out to observe people working with Libraries Australia, there were two rules: no bosses, and we weren't sending librarians out to watch how people did the work. We had to think completely differently about it. They found one lady, I always think about this lady, who had memorised a list of 40 libraries who she knew offered a fast and efficient ILL service. And when they came back and told me that, I just thought, we've got to do better than that, guys. So we can. You can now actually have the favourite libraries, so you can select any number of favourite libraries that could be reciprocal, preferred, your best mate works there and she's going to get something to you faster than the next library, or affiliated libraries. So it's really easy to edit your favourites, and I think people will really like that. The other important interface change, and this might be a joy to cataloguers' hearts, it'll make a big difference for our members and for database quality, is to support comparing records and reporting duplicates. So I'll just move forward. Okay, so our members will now be able to view between 2 and 4 records in one screen. And the records are selected from the search results. You can deselect them all, and you can view them in full and marked views if you want to. Then you just say, okay, I want to compare it. And then you start diving down into the detail. We've got 4 records here for Cloud Street. Which one do you actually want? You can view the records in full view or mark view. They're presented in a table. It's really easy to start seeing what's different there. You can have a look at the holdings displays as well if you want to, because you might decide a record from the National Library should be a pretty good record and maybe that's the one you want to choose. You can make all sorts of decisions there. You can then actually select what you think is the best record, and you can simultaneously report the duplicate record. I don't know about in Te Puna, but people hate duplicate records in Libraries Australia. And they had a really clunky workflow for how to actually work on this, so we think we've actually been able to improve that for them too. Of course, Libraries Australia search is really, it just pre-populates the form and off it goes. So this is a ref tracker. We use ref tracker for all communication with our members, and we've just used exactly the same service for reporting duplicates. Now, Libraries Australia Search is just one part of the Libraries Australia suite, and I just want to talk about a couple of other services that go around it behind the scenes, because many of these are in conjunction with our partner and supplier OCLC. We have the big CBS system, not Voyager, at the centre of Libraries Australia, and we of course have to upgrade CBS on a regular basis. But we're using other software from OCLC. In 2011-12, we implemented their duplicate detection software, and in the course of a year, almost 500,000 duplicate records, it's 500,000 out of 25 million, it's a pretty big number, were removed from the database, and something we could never have achieved using human review. And last financial year, we implemented their Relate software, which matches headings in bibliographic records with the corresponding authority record and replaces the non-preferred heading with the preferred form. Now, prior to doing this, the only links between bibliographic and authority records were those added manually by cataloguers using the cataloguing client. But in the first 15 months of operation, this software matched 7.5 million authorities and bibliographic records, something we could never have achieved. Both pieces of software now just run in the background, and of course they have really exponentially improved the quality of the database, something that is also very important to our members. We implemented version 6 of the VDX software for our LAD customers 10 days ago, which is still a version behind some of our members and behind the Te Puna hosted service. But it still offers substantial benefits to our users. And just last weekend, we implemented the CBS Job Manager, known as CJM. Now, this piece of OCLC software, I can tell you, was a long time coming, and I suspect it might have been a longer time coming if we hadn't actually sent one of our senior staff to a meeting of European users of this system to say, guys, what's happening here? Finally, we've implemented it, and it offers us new opportunities to undertake large-scale data maintenance without programmers. So just a few examples. We'll be able to conditionally modify or delete specified parts of records, fixing incorrect codes, changing obsolete subject headings. We'll be able to manage that ourselves. Copying the contents of a subfield to somewhere else in the field. On holdings, we'll be able to do big batch deletions. We'll be able to transfer to another customer, which is really important when we've got lots of library mergers going on. We'll be able to delete local system numbers, change holdings text, and we'll be able to do this all ourselves, which is really, really important because we have to compete all the time for programmer time. So we think that the speed of our new Libraries Australia search database and these new tools will assist us to speed up the process of full holdings refreshes. This is a really big deal for us in Libraries Australia. Last year we did a holdings refresh for the Australian National University, 1 million holdings. We had to do it. It took us 5 months to get it through the system. We're hoping we can improve on that. We're also working in another new area with our OCLC colleagues in Melbourne. We had a really effective, I would say an exemplary working relationship over the last couple of years as Australian libraries have started implementing their cloud-based wheelchair management services, or WMS, ILMS. We've so far added the holdings of 14 WMS holdings to Libraries Australia, and we're nearly finished work on another 3 that are more complex. This is a new world for us because up until now our data flows have pretty much been from an individual library to us at Libraries Australia, and then we just push them all through to WorldCat. But with WMS, the records and holdings of course are being added to WorldCat and then being pulled back to Libraries Australia, and the trick there is how to stop the data just endlessly cycling around. So we think we've just about sorted that. And this is important because OCLC have got about 100 libraries lined up to move to this software in the near future. And in terms of that relationship, they insist that if somebody buys that software, they have to be a Libraries Australia member. So this actually means that through this advent of this new cloud-based system, we've got a whole lot of smaller and medium-sized libraries whose holdings, whose collections were not previously discoverable in any environment other than the local catalogue, will actually be available at the national level. So I applaud them for that. We've also, of course, know that we've got Ex Libris's ALMA coming on board. We have at least 17 large member libraries who are implementing ALMA in the next 6 to 8 months. So at this stage, we certainly expect their data flows will remain coming into Libraries Australia with a standardised profile, but that again could change in the future. You know, all of that, they've got a relationship with WorldCat, the data could all go to WorldCat and we'd have to figure out how to get it back for our national services. So we'll see more and more of these data flow changes going on, and they really radically make you rethink what the business model is for your service. Now, I've just been talking about data flows, you know, catalogue-y things, and our Libraries Australia work is all about making data creation and flows as effortless as possible for our member libraries. But while that's important, the real deal is about putting effort into maximising the value, the impact of that data. We know that others are investing and experimenting with linked open data, and we find this fascinating. But at this stage, we are really happy just to let the OCLC research and development team, you know, about 70 people strong, research and test theories in this area, and we see no need to replicate their work, and we have no capacity to do that. So for us, we gain impact from the work that our Libraries Australia members do by pushing everything through to WorldCat, and then they can go ahead and do all that linked open data work. But our work is to increase the value of bibliographic data and other content, principally through Trove, so our services for the Australian public, and of course anybody else who wants to find it. So in terms of leveraging metadata, of maximising impact of what cataloguers do, for us it's actually all about Trove. So I can't leave you without talking a little bit about the relationship between these two services. So here's that LA diagram again. Almost every bibliographic record, with the exception of purchased serial solutions records, because they will not allow us to expose them, and every authority record in Libraries Australia is exposed through Trove. So Libraries Australia is for librarians, it's available to members only. Trove is for Australians, and it's available to everybody anywhere in the world. It's interesting, I had a conversation recently with a senior representative of another part of the GLAM sector. You use that term GLAM here, galleries, libraries, yeah. I won't say which sector because he can then be identified, who noted that his constituents see Trove as built by libraries for libraries. And I just said, oh, that was just so foreign to me, because, you know, what I said was, actually it's built by the National Library of Australia and our content partners, and it's actually for Australians, it's not for librarians. And I think that actually shows the differences between those sectors. They're actually thinking still about wanting to have a service that they build which is for them, whereas, you know, I'm only interested in the public at this point in time. So that will be a discussion to continue. And at the risk of overwhelming you with more complex systems diagrams, this one provides a quite simplified look at how Trove works. Libraries Australia on the left is just one of the feeds into Trove. So all the records that flow into Trove are aimed at supporting discovery, and they're converted from MarcXML to a simple DC format. Now, Trove is indexed by Google. Trove's size and consistency means that it's a really attractive target for Google, and more than 75% of all visitors to Trove come from Google. I think we don't need to pay attention to our front pages anymore, because it's not how anybody gets to us. We believe that the existence of Trove significantly increases the return on libraries' cataloguing investment by making their collections more discoverable and more useful to a wider audience. We support deep linking back to home catalogues too. Trove also has an API allowing individuals and organisations to easily access very, very large data sets for interrogation or for reuse in other apps or web services. And all the content, the bibliographic content and other content, is freely available for them to take away. So Trove is in itself an important syndicator or value adder to those bibliographic authority records. Between Trove and our contribution to WorldCat, I think that we can be confident that resources held by Australian libraries will be discoverable well beyond the limitations of the home catalogue. Like our colleagues at Digital NZ, we work directly with custodians of digital collections outside the library sector to add their metadata to Trove. The scale of this work is really quite similar to Digital NZ. I think Digital NZ, you've just added your 150th content partner, and we're probably about that size, and in fact the team size is similar. But we also acquire article level metadata from two vendors, the Australian Informant and Cengage Gale, for inclusion in Trove. The metadata is from licensed resources, and Trove users who are members of libraries who subscribe to these resources are able to access the content. Now, in earlier, headier, more ambitious days, we had hoped to ramp up this part of the service to effectively offer a full discovery layer to make all of those expensive e-resources that we purchase more discoverable by Australians. But experience and political realities in Australia taught us that we were never going to get buy-in to national access to electronic resources. We tried so hard. We had two parliamentary committees recommending that. It ain't going to happen. So we had to walk away from that dream. And we also found that it's an incredibly expensive undertaking to try to deal with publishers' article level metadata. Behind the scenes, they're just basket cases, and every single database is different, and they can't do things that in the library world I think we just take for granted. I don't know how they operate their businesses, frankly. I guess they're all going to have to change them. So really, we had to kind of give up on the dream of expanding this part of Trove, and if I had my time again, I'm not sure that we'd actually go in this direction. But one thing we certainly would continue, we acquire all metadata from Australian university research repositories, and there is no other aggregation of this metadata. So Trove is effectively the national discovery service for recent Australian research. And we'd like to refine discovery of these research outputs. Universities want to be able to find particular things. The Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council have both just mandated that any research that they fund must be made publicly available. And of course, those institutions really want to be able to find the research that they funded, but you'll know that we can only do with the data what it allows us to do. And universities are going to have to really lift their game in terms of metadata around these resources to achieve their own aims. And then, of course, there's Trove newspapers, and most of you know Trove is mostly newspapers. We provide access to more than 12 million digitised and searchable pages of Australian newspapers, with that number increasing rapidly. So, put together, all of these resources are very attractive and useful for Australians. We're delighted with the results of a large-scale 2013 survey of Trove users, which proved beyond doubt that Trove usage is completely proportional to Australia's geographic population distribution, and that we've finally been able to reach out to Australians in big and regional cities, the towns, country, and even the very remote outback areas. And I'll just stop for a minute and say, you know, when we're talking about remote in Australia, you know we're really talking about remote, don't you? My sister worked for 5 years in a remote Western Australian community. It's about 2,000 kilometres from Perth. It's at least 5 hours drive to the next town of any size whatsoever. It gets cut off by large floods all the time. It's dealing with very disadvantaged communities. There are 4 separate Indigenous communities clustered around the big river, the Fitzroy River. About half of those Indigenous folks are doing kind of okay, the other half really not doing okay, so quite a disadvantaged community. It's such a small little place that my sister ran the tourist bureau and the library, and she was the emergency controller for the airport, and she was the keeper of the body bags. When there was a flood, she was the one who'd go and do the exhumations as more of the kind of cemetery washed away. You're getting the kind of picture here of a community where everybody has to do a bit of something. So when I was thinking about what do we have to do, where can we have impact, I always thought about my sister and this tiny little community. it's no good me just thinking about middle-class, middle-aged people like me in Canberra. They're not the people that we need to reach. So I like to think of, Sharon in Fitzroy Crossing and think about what we could do for the community she was serving. So Trove it's big. It's really big. Nearly 400 million resources discoverable through Trove, of which 25 million are from Libraries Australia. 21 million, I should say, unique visits last year. Around about 75,000 unique visitors every day. As I said, 75% of them come from Google. About 80% of activity is in the newspaper zone. But I still think that this means that Trove is bringing a very large number of eyeballs to other content, including those bibliographic records that let people get at resources that they can't yet get online. The content is growing really fast. We talk about Trove being a beast that we have to feed, and I could fib and say that my hair wasn't grey before I started in this job, but it wouldn't quite be true. And use is also growing fast, so use of this service has doubled over the last 2 years. What's really important to us here is engagement with our community. And this is not a community that we can go and visit in the laundromat, that we can see. It's a very dispersed community. We engage with our users, our Trove users, through a blog, Twitter, and lots of face-to-face presentations. They engage with each other through their own blogs and our user forum. And of course, they engage with our content. If you know about Trove, you'll know about the newspaper text correction, where we let people actually correct the OCR text. And in less than 5 years, the equivalent of 310 FTE, full-time equivalent, volunteer years have been given to this activity. I mean, it's just, it is so much bigger a reach than we have ever had in the past. It's so much more engagement. It's a whole new audience for the library who never knew about us before, and now not only are they using our service, but they're wanting to improve it. They want to give something back. They want to actually engage with us. One of my little back of my mind problems is that it's possible that in the next couple of years we'll be able to implement some software to do what those human beings are currently doing, correcting the text. What do I do with that engaged audience group? I can't let them go again. So we're thinking about higher value activities that they could undertake on behalf of the community. I also wanted to mention that it's not just text correction that goes on. We have huge addition of tags, comments, and the creation of user lists, a little bit like Digital NZ sets. And in fact, the user lists are the fastest growing part of Trove engagement. And I think for us, one measure of our impact is that Trove is really becoming part of the lexicon. Over the last 18 months, we've realised that our users, now they regularly use the verb to trove, which is really interesting. And I had a day at work recently, I had a dog of a day, and I was driving home really late, and it was dark, and I was tired and feeling a little bit down, and I put on ABC Radio National, and there's the evening session on, and the presenter who's talking about an aspect of modern Australian history suddenly says, "Oh, I troved this. Have you troved this as well?" And I'm thinking, hey, we've actually made it here. So to trove, people refer to themselves as Trovites. They collaborate on Trove Tuesdays, where they share their discoveries on a single blog. And just last week, our Trove manager, Tim Sherritt, heard a bunch of digital humanists asking whether a particular data source was Troveable. And so in the spirit of this linguistic creativity, we're celebrating our 5-year anniversary with Trovember. And I'm sure we can combine Movember and Trovember. Do you have Movember here? Yeah, okay. We're actually thinking about what we can do in that space. So if you want to know about Trove, do explore the service, and we put all of our papers about Trove up on our staff papers website. So if you're curious, please do explore. So none of this work is easy. Either the Libraries Australia or Trove work is easy. All of it requires considerable intellectual, creative, technical and financial resources, and we receive no special funding from government. people always think the government gave us money for Trove. They haven't given us a brass razoo for it. We just have to actually use our existing budgets because we know we can get more impact by moving into that sphere. It's not good enough to not do anything until you get more money. You have to shift your own resources too. We operate both services on really lean budgets, and obviously what we want to do never matches up to what we can achieve in the short time frame. We do have really clear sense of direction for both services, and you don't have to read this, you could find it on our website if you wanted to. But behind them are always bigger questions. How can we, the National Library, maximise the impact of work done by Australian libraries and collecting institutions? Where can we, as a National Library, have the most impact for the people of Australia? Libraries Australia has for decades been the best, the most efficient, the most effective way of maximising the effort put into describing library collections. But will this continue to be so? Will it be the case that this work will be more effectively done at the international level in the near or medium future? I've spent much of my career working with archives, and so for me, context is everything. And when we ask ourselves these questions at the National Library, we need to consider the context of what we know about use of our service. That's kind of outputs part of it, those graphs that show how many things are happening. What our users tell us about the use of their services and the value they place on them. The context of what new technologies make possible. And I think this is really important. Our context is one in which we have a sophisticated IT department which is able to work directly with our Australian users to deliver a service which is really meeting their needs. So if any of these bits of the context change, if service use plummets, or our big libraries decide they can get better value elsewhere than they're getting from Libraries Australia, or there's another unknown shift in technology, or if our government decides that shared services should dominate and that government agencies should not deliver services that can be purchased in the open marketplace, then obviously our thinking would need to change. I have no crystal ball, but I'm confident that our current suite of Libraries Australia services, that national collaboration, will be the best way to offer service for about the next 5 years or so. Beyond that, I think it's much more likely that international aggregation will be more efficient and effective, and we may decide to shift our resources into other areas. So focusing nationally on bibliographic services has been our focus for 30 years, but might it be that that national collaboration will be around digitisation, digital preservation, digital user engagement, access to commercial digital content. It could be any of these things that we need to concentrate in the future as being the most effective way that we can kind of put our effort. So if you ask me to come back in 10 years, and I still intend to be at the National Library in 10 years, I might be able to answer you. Thank you.